It's like the Democrats have run through their dog and pony tricks enough time. It really gets old. People don't buy it anymore.
I'm reluctant to use words because of the climate we're in right now, like tear it down, burn it down, like that kind of stuff. But, but that's the sentiment that's out there. There's a lot of anger because people are suffering.
People would say spoiler candidate, spoiler, spoiler. I would say first and foremost, most of you are living in blue states, so who cares?
Our politics of necessity has come to an absolute dead end. And the question is whether we're going to die with it.
Oh, we'll get you a nice little headline going like Democratic Party, RIGS, North Carolina Senate. Get some good clicks and eyeballs on it, because that's the game.
It writes itself.
Just, walking down the street, I get cold-shouldered everywhere, if not outright hostility. I'm sure you know what that's about because,
just a little bit, but mostly just when I wear my Stein 2016 pen. What a sincere pleasure to be joined again on the podcast by Dr. Jill Stein, activist, physician, and of course, presidential candidate. Welcome back to Bad Faith.
Great to be with you, Brianna.
And today joined for the first time in the man who precipitated today's conversation, U.S. Senate candidate Matthew Hoh, who many of you have been following his race because he is a Green Party candidate running in the state of North Carolina, who has encountered an issue with the Democratic Party that many of us on the left have kept our eye on for many, many, many years, since we perhaps first got engaged with the candidacy of Bernie Sanders in 2016 or 2020 and became front row witnesses to the extent the Democratic Party will go to attack, undermine, and completely derail any left candidate, but especially those who have the audacity to run outside of the Democratic Party entirely. Welcome to the podcast, Matthew.
Thanks, Brianna. I'm really excited to be here.
All right. So for those who haven't been following what's been happening to you in your campaign, what's the skinny?
Okay. We had to get on the ballot as the North Carolina Green Party. And so we were required to collect 13,865 signatures. We collected more than 22,500 signatures. We met all the deadlines. We did everything procedurally correct. We had, of those 22,500 signatures, almost 15,953 were verified, which were then turned into the state on June 1st to be certified so that we could be allowed to run as a party and have candidates on the ballot in November. Put into context, there was also a July 1st deadline as well for us to be certified by. That July 1st deadline didn't just include the state of North Carolina certifying us, but also that we had to have, after certification, a nominating convention, our people go out and register as Greens, and then our candidates go and file for candidacy. So there are a bunch of things that had to occur after certification. I'm just putting this as context because the State Board of Elections did not meet to certify us until June 30th, which would have given us just 24 hours, not even 24 hours, to get all those other things done. So this was proverbial bad faith on their part from the get out, right? I mean, there is no, you could see that there was never any intention of letting us get on the ballot. So again, the counties have verified almost 16,000 signatures, which put us over by 2,100. That process, for people who are not familiar with petitioning, it is common for petitions to not have all their signatures verified. In fact, if you go and you look at the studies that are done, it's about a 75% verification rate nationwide. So for every signature you collect, only 3 are going to count. And that occurs across the country, not just here in North Carolina. So we were right about on that number. However, there were 200 irregularities, as the state was calling it, that the counties have pointed out, things that were unusual. And we said, okay. And they spent 30 days looking at those irregularities, and we cooperated fully. At the certification hearing on June 30th, they said, even though we've had your signatures for 30 days, even though we've found nothing that would disqualify you or put into doubt any of the 16,000 verified signatures that you collected, these 200 irregularities, which were never verified and never counted towards the total for us to get on the ballot, because these exist, that means there could be more. And because there could be more, that means we have to investigate. But because tomorrow is July 1st, the deadline, we don't have time to investigate, so we're not going to certify you. And the whole process was just one gross display of the arrogance of power. I mean, the attitude that we were given was basically, we don't like this. We're not going to do it. What are you going to do about it? And in a brazen partisan manner, because the State Board of Elections is composed of 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans, they voted 3 Democrats against, 2 Republicans for, and we were denied certification. And here we are now fighting to get our rightful spot on the ballot.
So for people who are a little confused about the posture of this, the idea is that the Democrats voted to not certify you because they feel like your participation in a general election is going to spoil. Sorry, we've got a canine on the loose in the background.
That's commentary. She's providing important.
Wait to mine chime in anytime now. Anytime now.
LOL. I love that. I got a rascal down on the floor in front of me as well. But so that the Democrats are making the argument that they often make about the Green Party or third parties in general, that if they are on the ballot, if people have the opportunity to actually choose to vote for who they want to vote for, it will come at the detriment of Democrats, whilst the Republicans strategically think you should be on the ballot because it helps them in the long run. Although, isn't it the case that there is also a Libertarian candidate on the ballot?
There is a Libertarian candidate on the ballot, and Libertarians maintain their spot on the ballot here because North Carolina has a couple different tiers as to how you can be on the ballot. One of them is if you have a presidential candidate in 70% of the states. So that allows the Libertarians to maintain their ballot access. Libertarians have been great supporters for us, though. One of the comments that we've seen has been from the chair of the North Carolina Libertarian Party, who has made the point that, look, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been involved in 8 petition efforts. Never once has the State Board of Elections done what they did to the Green Party in the sense of saying that we're going to, because there were these signatures that weren't counted, that puts into doubt all the rest of your signatures. This is unprecedented. This is not. It's not as if this had been a standard that had been applied to other parties, other independent candidates. According to one of the board members, the State Board of Elections in 2020 never verified a signature. It was always done at the county level. And the same is this. That's basically what the Libertarians are saying. Like, well, we've done this 8 times and never once has the state verified a signature. It's always been done at the county level. So what is going on here? And it's clear what's going on here. They see the success of what we did this spring, going out and getting tens of thousands of signatures, the enthusiasm we were met with by people who want that change, who want political choice. I mean, it can get into all the stories we experienced out there as we were listening to people. But then the other side of that is, it's not that they don't want me on the ballot, or it's not that they don't want the Green Party on the ballot per se. It's that they don't want the people who we represent to have that choice on the ballot, particularly the issues of single-payer health care, affordable housing, ending the war on drugs, livable wages, action on the climate. Those are real dangers to the big money donors of the Democrats and Republicans, and that's the threat they see, and that's why they don't want us on the ballot, is because we are a threat to their money-making.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up those issues, because so much of the conversation that happens about the strategy of whether or not people should vote blue no matter who or vote for Greens really, I think, sidesteps how substantive the Green Party's platform is. You are a former Marine, is that correct? Who, left the State Department over the war in Afghanistan, who has strong anti-interventionist credentials when we are living in a political moment where so many people on both sides of the aisle are being really motivated by frustration with U.S. interventionism and spending on wars abroad, particularly in this moment, the war in Ukraine, when there's so much happening domestically and people feel really abandoned in the wake of the failure of Build Back Better. With all of this going on, I think you're right to point out that it's deeply frustrating for people who are flailing around, frankly, for any opportunity to vote for a political candidate that actually represents their interests. To see that there's a Green Party person on the ballot is a genuine threat to the Democratic Party, which has been skating by on being just marginally better than the Republican Party for a very long time. But this is even more nefarious, right? It feels even more nefarious than them saying, okay, you've got the signatures you need. You overshot by over 2,000 signatures. Everything should be good. We're going to go ahead and have special scrutiny on your signatures. Say you have enough, even with the questionable signatures, to pass muster, but we're going to, because it could be that these irregularities are broader than we've actually found them to be, keep you off the ballot. Tell me more about who the lawyers are that were hired to conduct this investigation and their affiliation with the Democratic Party.
Right, and that's a whole adjacent aspect of this. So in parallel, we have what the State Board of Elections is doing, and clearly a partisan effort, the due process that was not allowed. Our attorney was allowed to ask one question during the hearing. And he asked, Mr. Chairman, does any of what you're talking about apply at all to any of our verified signatures, the 16,000 signatures that count towards us getting on the ballot? And the chair of the State Board of Elections refused to answer. And then when our attorney tried to follow up, he was angrily shouted down and his microphone was muted. I mean, that was the extent of the due process we received in that hearing. I mean, it was brazen. It was startling. I mean, speaking to people who've been watching this and doing this and covering this for 20, 30 years, they're saying, I've never seen anything like it in the sense of how overt it was. And again, it's that smug arrogance of power that we're talking about here. Adjacent to everything with the State Board of Elections, about 3 weeks ago, we got told that the Elias Law Firm was down here. The Elias Law Group was down here. Elias Law Group is Mark Elias's law firm. If people don't know Mark Elias, he is arguably the most prominent Democratic attorney in the country. He was John Kerry's general counsel, Hillary Clinton's general counsel, Kamala Harris's general counsel. If you don't know him, go to his Wikipedia page. It's very clear how much of a force he is in Democratic politics, and you'll understand why I say he's arguably the most prominent Democratic attorney. His law firm comes down here early, mid-June. They get the petitions that we had submitted from the State Board of Elections, and they begin a process of trying to get people to remove their names from petitions, as well as ginning up issues to file complaints against us. One of the things that they say, just to get this out of the way, is that we were out there deceiving people. We weren't letting people know who we were. Anyone who's ever been involved with the Green Party, we're like vegans, and I'm a vegan, so I can say this. We tell everybody who we are. We're out there with our T-shirts, our hats, giving people buttons. We've got all our literatures, our signs. And the petition itself says, for the creation of the Green Party in North Carolina. But these are the things they gin up as challenges, right? To try and throw these obstacles in front of us to delay us, exhaust us, knock us off the ballot, cause problems. And Jill can talk about this much better than I can, that's for sure. But what they start doing is they start calling people. So about 2 weeks ago, we start getting phone calls from people saying, or emails saying, hey, someone called me and asked me to take my name off petition. And then we start getting told, hey, you guys called me and asked me to take our name off the petition. And we said, what? And what this was the Elias Law Group had contracted out, and they were calling. They had matched up because the petitions don't have phone numbers or anything on there. And they matched up the names, obviously, with probably their donor base or something, and started calling people. And sometimes they would identify as the Democratic Party, in particular, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, the DSCC. Other times they wouldn't say who they were. They refused to say who they were. Other times they would say they're the Green Party. And at times they supposedly said they were a State Board of Elections. And we had we heard about this. So some of our people got prepared for these phone calls, and we were able to get some audio recordings where they clearly say, I'm calling with the Green Party, and so then they start texting people. And then they started showing up at people's homes, including people who had told them, I don't want my name removed. They then showed up their homes to try and coerce them further. And so it was clear harassment because they were calling people 5, 6, 7 times a day. I saw one screenshot where one person was called 4 times in 3.5 hours. What they would say was they were making purely political arguments. Again, the spoiler argument that Green Party helps the Republicans, abortion isn't in balance. Please don't be the person who gives us Please, exactly. Please don't be the person who gives the election to Republicans. Otherwise, the loss of abortion will be your fault. That type of shaming, right? So that harassment, that bullying, that shaming, and then clearly misleading people, lying to them, committing fraud in order for them to remove their names. So we're really in a two-front fight here. We've got the State Board of Elections on one side, and then we've got the Elias Law Group and the Democratic Party. They brought Elias down here right away. There's no one in their bullpen past Elias. So they brought their biggest and best to fight us because obviously they thought that we were that much of a threat, which in a way is flattering, but it just goes to show how corrupt this whole process is. And even though it's a two-fight front here, right, between the State Board of Elections and the DSCC and Elias, we know that there's linkage there. We know that they're communicating, that they're working together. So it really is a common enemy, to continue to use that phraseology. But it's something that we're excited for, because this is the fight we wanted. It proves our point, and it shows that the two-party system is undemocratic, it's corrupt, and it's harmful.
Okay, I want to come back to that point about how this is the fight you wanted. But first, for listeners who might not have already heard these audio clips, I'm going to play one right now of the kind of phone calls they were making. And again, for context, this is them taking the names that you've gathered on your petition, right, and cross-referencing them in all likelihood with their Democratic Party, voter donor email list, because there's no contact information on the signature list that you've gathered.
Right.
Using their kind of Democratic Party proprietary information to track down the people who have now expressed an interest in having another political option on the ballot, and misrepresenting themselves as Green Party members themselves to coerce them into removing their names from the ballot to get you ballot access, the petition to get you ballot access.
Right. And to go one step further on that, those petitions are public records. So they received it as a public records request. My understanding is that they got that because they wanted to confirm the integrity of the petition process, which they do when they first ask the person whether or not to confirm whether or not they signed or not. But then they go into a whole political thing. So, one of the things when we're out there collecting the signatures is that it's very clear that we cannot take that data and use that data for anything. Right. So there's that. And will we ever see an investigation into that? Will anything come of that? I doubt it. Meanwhile, we're saddled with this could be, my grandparents, my grandfather was German. I could be the next Kaiser of Germany. There's a lot of things that could be, and so what we're dealing with here, and one of the things about it that people bring up to me is that, look, where is the distance between what the Democrats are doing here with that argument that because there could be fraud, we can't certify you, and what Giuliani and those crooks were arguing in court about the elections in 2020, that because there could be fraud, we can't certify these results, even though we're not going to show you any evidence. That's the same thing we had here. We asked to see the evidence and we were just denied that because there was no evidence.
You're calling to confirm whether or not I signed a petition. Mass, who are you calling with? What organization? Oh, is this the Green Party?
Yes.
You're with the Green Party?
Yes, and we have you listed as wanting to get the candidates on the North Carolina ballot. Did you sign that petition?
So you were calling as a representative of the Green Party?
As a volunteer, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I did sign it.
Okay, and would you say you strongly support it or just somewhat support it?
I don't think I'd sign something unless I strongly support it.
Okay, well, thank you for confirming. Animal participation in elections is important. If the Green Party is on the ballot, it will take votes away from Democrats, giving Republicans a huge advantage that will help them win North Carolina in 2022 and 2024. There's far too much at stake to let this happen. Are you interested in asking to have your name removed from this petition or leave it as is?
I'm confused. So if you're with the Green Party, why are you asking to remove? I'm sorry?
Yes, I totally.
Okay, first of all, God bless that man. He's a hero. The guy who was receiving the call is such a gem for responding the way he did and for getting that on the record. But Dr. Stein, look, this has to be so old hat to you, hearing these kind of techniques and hearing that particular argument that to vote for a Green Party candidate is necessarily to undermine the interest of the Democratic Party and to be, in effect, helping Republicans. What do you think when you hear them making those kind of cold calls and trying to still continue that pitch, even in the circumstances we're in right now politically?
This is such an abuse of our democracy. It's just infuriating, and it really triggers me to hear what Matt is going through, and it brings back, not just what happened in 2016, but what's been continuing ever since, and actually long preceded 2016. This is standard operating procedure for the Democrats. I think as they become more desperate, they become even more repressive. But the hypocrisy is just off the charts. And here they are pretending to be the party that's opposing voter suppression. But that's what they're doing here. This is, voter suppression, pure and simple. This happens in campaign after campaign. What the Democrats are doing here now to Matt's campaign, they did to Howie Hawkins with very similar strategies, where a board of elections that was dominated by Democrats would sit on the petitions until it was the very last minute, and then they would claim that there was no time to evaluate the petitions on the merits or evaluate a complaint that was made on the merits. And in Wisconsin, for example, I believe it was the undergraduate law review at Columbia had a quote to the effect that this is essentially partisan interference, in so many words, in a campaign that defies precedent, which is just awful on every count. Yet I dare say this is often the rule and not the exception in how the Democrats work, not only with elections, not only with ballot signatures, but with just about everything else in terms of silencing Greens and political opposition in general. Howie Hawkins just reported that in New York, all the other opposition parties whose ballot line is not linked to the Democrats. So, for example, Working Families Party is linked to the Democrats. So they got their ballot line. But all the other parties, and there were like 5 or 7 of them, were all wiped out through similar challenges, basically, to the signatures. And it's not only ballot petitions, it's access to the media, it's participation in debates. When I was first was tricked into becoming a candidate back in the year 2002, I was allowed we fought our way basically into a debate, but that was pretty much the end of it. That was sort of the last of when you could use the democratic process, when there was still the memory of the League of Women Voters who used to run the presidential debates. Of course, I wasn't a presidential candidate back then, but there used to be a higher standard in which debates were not handled in a blatantly partisan manner, which they are now. And I think now they're like, presidential debates, I think, are being becoming entirely obsolete, and Republicans are refusing to participate in them at all. But, it's been this sort of race to the bottom between the Democrats and the Republicans in terms of the sellout to big money and to big donors. The Supreme Court decision, this didn't start with Citizens United, whenever that was, 2010 or something like that. It actually preceded, there were a whole series of Supreme Court decisions, beginning with Buckley versus Vallejo, which was in the 1970s, that began to unravel the power of money to essentially control our elections, where money was considered speech, and there was no limit to the amount of money that donors could pour into the process. And the whole edifice for regulating the power of money has been unraveling really for decades, as money has become more and more concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. Witness that the presidential election in 2020, actually, it was the total election. The total 2020 election saw $14 billion spent, which doubled the $7 billion price tag just 4 years earlier. And so much of that now is coming in these huge increments. As a Democrat, or I should say as a donor, contributing to Democrats now, you can contribute up to $600,000 in one check through these so-called victory funds, which are essentially legal trickery, legal trickery for doing an end run around the old rules for limiting money in politics. There are just all kinds of tricks around that, in the same way that super PACs and dark money also allow an end run. So I guess, the simple point here is that, we are day by day, we are more of a rapacious oligarchy, and that more and more money is concentrated into fewer and fewer hands, which has found its way many ways to control not only Congress and the presidency, but also the judiciary. And witness a very interesting report that was just done by the Lever and David Sirota. You may have already covered this, about the Judicial Crisis Network, I think it's called, which essentially pours huge amount of money from very few donors into judicial appointments. So, the Supreme Court falling to this, utter corruption that rules the day now in the Supreme Court. This didn't suddenly happen, and it didn't happen because there are opponents, because there are principled political opponents who are yelling fire here, which is what we do as Greens. We have really called the crisis, not only with the climate, not only with our healthcare system, but also with our democracy. We are the ones who are identifying the crisis and identifying the solution. And to think, just one last point, which is that to think that silencing opposition is the solution here, and all these fears and about the spoiler effect and the fear mongering that goes on, it's just totally wrong-headed. What we need here more than anything, is opposition and the liberation of our election process through ranked choice voting or through proportional representation. This is fixable.
Yeah, I gotta say, back in 2016, again, I was an anonymous human, so nobody was listening to anything that I had to say, and I certainly wasn't controlling any electoral outcomes, although I wish I had that power. But the argument that I would make to my peers and to the 100 people that followed me on Twitter was that even if, people would say spoiler candidate, spoiler. I would say first and foremost, most of you are living in blue states, so who cares? Just do what or deep red states. And either way, your vote's a drop in the bucket. And if you do vote for a Green Party candidate, then at least you can help them get to 5% and get ballot access and federal matching funds and all of these things that actually make the fight easier going down the line, and your vote won't be thrown away. However, what's interesting to me in this moment is that I feel less compelled to even make arguments for why people should care at all about the spoiler effect for a couple of reasons. One, even though, as we all know at this point, Bernie voters in 2016, more of them bent the knee and voted for Hillary Clinton than Hillary Clinton voters bent the knee and voted for Barack Obama in 2008. We all know that, but for, however many millions of Obama Trump voters, that, Hillary could have won, and that had nothing to do with Trump voters. We know that Hillary didn't go to Wisconsin. We know all of the things already. So despite all of that being the case, progressives are still blamed for these electoral outcomes, which makes me less eager to even appease those who have these kind of concerns because they seem like they're in bad faith. But moreover, in 2016, I made the argument that pressuring people over potential Supreme Court outcomes, pressuring people by saying, hey, you need Hillary even if you don't like her because she's going to appoint Supreme Court justices and we don't want to overturn Roe. I argued that wasn't persuasive. Not that it wasn't a possible outcome, but that it wasn't persuasive to people because it had been too much the boy who cried wolf. And many people got mad at that tweet and said, oh, she's being, indifferent to the effects of overturning Roe and all that. No. What I said, and I was proven right by history, is that kind of fear mongering doesn't change the minds of voters who are so tired of being disrespected by the two-party system. And in this moment post-Roe, it does feel like there's more of an appetite than there's existed before for people to say, I don't give a hoot. I am going to vote my principle because I feel so deeply disrespected by the Democratic Party, who's been holding the Supreme Court up as a carrot/stick for decades without codifying Roe, without codifying any of these other privacy rights, without taking any steps to protect people in vulnerable situations in vulnerable states where there was already constructively very limited access to abortion anyway. And now that the worst has happened. You expect me to just vote harder. I perceive an openness to more third-party voting now than I have ever in my lifetime. And I wonder what you perceive in this moment, Dr. Stein, and how you think the left should exploit this moment.
Exactly. And I would probably use the word leverage this moment because, because this is just, and this is small d democratic, to actually empower ourselves to the democracy that we not only deserve, but that we're not going to get out of here alive without, witness the climate, witness the precipice of nuclear conflagration that we're on. With Ukraine and the increasing escalation and just the craziness with which that war is being waged, I feel like I'm kind of a walking barometer on the political atmosphere, because when people are angry, I get it out in public, and just walking down the street, I get cold shouldered everywhere, if not outright hostility. I'm sure you know what that's about, because
just a little bit, but mostly just when I wear my Stein 2016 pen.
I can imagine. Yeah. But I have to say that over the last many months, since Roe, even before Roe, I found that the more I would get smeared on social media, the more my account will grow. And, it's like the Democrats have run through their dog and pony tricks enough time. It really gets old. People don't buy it anymore. And it's so patently, a hunk of baloney. I mean, given what's happening with Roe right now, not only did the Democrats do nothing for 50 years in the run-up when they absolutely could have, but even after the Dobbs decision was leaked, for 2 months, they could have done something like have promoted legislation at least to minimize the impact, or to propose a 15-week, abortion protection bill. There's so much public support. What is it, like 2/3 or more of the public really supports the basic impact of Roe and didn't want to see it go. So that could have been leveraged. But, it's entirely beyond the thinking of the Democrats to consider conducting an actual voter mobilization, a legislative campaign, whatever. They just don't do that because their real their affinity group is not everyday working people or women even, it really is their big donors. And that's who their whole system is built to engage and to collaborate with. So the Democrats did nothing then after the decision, and only now, 2 weeks after they could have established emergency pop-up clinics on federal lands. There are all kinds of things that could be done even now, let alone having pushed back against the filibuster, which they could have done. They could have compelled Manchin and Sinema. There are things they could have done. Not only did they fail to exercise party controls, which they are capable of using, against progressives. They could have taken away the chairmanship from
Pelosi.
Yeah, exactly. And they didn't do that. They also proceed with their business as usual support for anti-choice candidates, getting Henry Cuellar elected in Texas, supporting Manchin's reelection every time against progressives who have challenged
Biden appointing this anti-choice federal judge.
Exactly. Who they are still, it's like you couldn't make this stuff up. It's just unbelievable. In the same way that what's happening to Matt's campaign right now, you couldn't make this up. I hope David Sirota will make a movie out of this, because this has a drama of its own about kind of the absolute assault that is taking place on our democracy. And it's our elections, it's our judiciary, it is the, freedom of the press, it is freedom of speech, and the heavy hammer of censorship that's coming down on us. It's really people who want to take this pervasive crisis of democracy and tunnel it into, oh, it's because people like Matthew Hoh shouldn't get on the ballot, or people like me, shouldn't be up there running for higher office. No, it's exactly the opposite. You can take away the spoiling in a second. The Democrats in Congress could have done that in a blink of an eye. They could have passed legislation to enable ranked choice voting, which assures that there will never be a so-called spoiled election. Nobody's going to take votes away from anybody else, which is a false concept and certainly did not occur in the 2016 election, did not occur in Nader's election. These are people who otherwise will stay home. It's all just, it's layer upon layer of just total BS. And
it's not only do they not support ranked choice voting, the Democratic Party goes out of their way to undermine successful ballot initiatives to achieve ranked choice voting in various states across the country. Let me come back to you, Matthew. You said earlier that at the end of the day, this is the fight you want. What did you mean by that?
Right. Hey, let me just first address something that's really important. If David Sirota does do a film about this, I prefer Joaquin Phoenix or Adam Driver to play me. Just to get that out there.
That's hilarious. I just watched House of Gucci last night, and I love Adam Driver, but so long as he doesn't have to do an Italian accent, I'm on board.
Yeah. What was up with those accents? Otherwise, I mean, that seemed to ruin the whole film. It wasn't just accents. It was like this broken English that they were speaking, and it just, it could have been so much better. I know, I know, but so if David, if you're listening, Joaquin Phoenix or Adam Driver, I think getting back to the overall point of this attitude towards voters that the Democrats have pursued for decades now is, and I'll push back on Jill's assertion that you can't make this up. And Charles Dickens did make this up. This is what we're living in is like a Dickens novel here, in the sense that the Democrats are saying to their voters, be happy with the crumbs we are giving you, because the other guys won't even give you crumbs. Right. I mean, that's the argument that they make. And why I'm doing this is twofold. I mean, I've got my political ideology. I'm a libertarian socialist. I've read a lot of books. I listen to Richard Wolff. I, listen to your show, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing is, the real reason is because of my life's experiences, right? There's been no accountability for the wars that have ruined and killed and made homeless tens of millions of people. No accountability for the wars here at home, the war on drugs, or that crime against humanity that's been happening at our border for decades. No accountability for any of that. No accountability for the economic injustice that is causing my loved ones to suffer. Right? I have people in my life who have to check their bank accounts before they go to the doctor. They're making dangerous choices for themselves and for their families because of how we have this for-profit healthcare system. I have people who that's their life's experience. I have neighbors who've lost homes because corporations have come in, bought the home, raised the rent by 50%, and then they have to. I mean, so this is all very real to me. And why I'm doing this, and so the idea of the fight I wanted to have, because a lot of this, Brianna, comes from the anger that I have, the desire for accountability, desire for justice. And this is the fight we want. And there's really great strategic reasons for that. We're proving our point, right? That the two-party system is corrupt, undemocratic, harmful. People know it, and then they see this and they say that's right. So it comes back to me. This idea that I don't want to be fighting other leftists on Twitter, right? I don't want to be fighting against other people, socialist alternative versus the Green Party versus DSA, that nonsense. No, the fight is with the state and with the Democratic Party, and by extension, the duopoly. Because I'm going to make it clear, I know that as partisan as this was for us, if I was a conservative candidate, we were a conservative party, it would have been flipped, and the Republicans would have been against us, the Democrats for us. So the whole system is corrupt. But this idea, the fight that I wanted, yes, absolutely, because these are the people that killed my friends and are killing our loved ones. I mean, this status quo is deadly, and I don't think we should ever forget that. No matter, because one of the things that argument about spoiling, and I reject that title, and I'm happy to take on the title of disruptor, though, because that's what we have to do. We have to disrupt the system. So I'm happy to be a disruptor. But what I get from people who say things such as, now's not the time to fight for healthcare, That it's okay not to have. Look, down here in North Carolina, there are 15 federal candidates. So there are 15 Democrats running for federal office. Only one supports single-payer health care. 1 out of 15. Meanwhile, we have people before the pandemic, we knew tens of thousands of people dying from lack of health care. We just had that National Academy of Science report that says 1 in 3 COVID deaths are attributable to a lack of health. So the for-profit healthcare industry killed more than 300,000 people. North Carolina, 1 in 4 adults are in collections for medical debt. Collections.
Oh my God.
Right? Not right. I mean,
1 in 4.
1 in 4. I mean, so throw out the morality of that, the justice of that. Just from a pure economic standpoint, how is that sustainable? We are cratering this country because we're squeezing all the money to the top. Right. So, again, for me, it gets back to this idea of I have people in my life that we have to stand up for. And we've seen the two-party system and the state, by extension, all at the behest of the corporations, the banks, and the wealthy, cause enormous suffering. And I think when I say this is the fight I want, because these are the people that I want to fight.
Yeah, I got to say, as I listen to you talk, we've been talking a lot on this show and on my call-in show about the left's attitude toward electoralism and how they feel about various progressive candidates who are continuing to run within the Democratic Party, whether it's squad members who, were elected Dems and continue to be Dems, but who some people would like to do a dirty break, whether it's someone like Nina Turner, who obviously ran and was twice assaulted by a lot of Democratic-backed dark money in her Ohio 11th race. Some people say, why do we keep trying? When it becomes clear the Democratic Party is willing to be as feckless and useless as they are in addressing the Republican Party and, addressing Federalist Society and pushing back on the incursions into the Supreme Court, they are extremely agile and dexterous when it comes to beating up on the left. And given that they have all of this energy to attack the left, why would anybody want to continue to run and operate within the Democratic Party? And there's other people who say, well, sure, but the uphill battle is so great for those trying to run outside of the party. And oftentimes left candidates have so few resources and are these individuals who are, spurred by personal tragedy or, their own personal precarity and don't necessarily have the resources to run a purely, quote unquote, symbolic race. They say, well, look, the only chance I have is to run within the Democratic Party. And this has been a conversation going back and forth for a year now or a year plus. But when I hear you describe this, and for me, the Roe really was a tipping point, kind of solidly putting me in the camp of I'm over the Democratic Party. I'm sorry. When you see the energy that goes behind attacking the left, it seems impossible to me that you could ever help people to understand more broadly the danger that the Democratic Party presents and how the Democratic Party is ultimately the off-ramp that prevents larger systemic change, the likes of which majorities of Americans want, if we all keep validating the system by running within it and supporting candidates within it. It's harder and harder for me to evade that reality. And I wonder what you make of the decision that some people make, people who I like. I have a great deal of affection for Senator Nina Turner and, certain other elected officials in the Democratic Party. But, what do you make of people who say, I didn't have a choice, I have to run as a Democrat, Matthew?
You do have a choice. Look, I had I've never been a member of a party other than the Green Party. I was always unaffiliated. But in DC doing the work I was doing, and I've come from an activist background, but also a think tank background in the years since I left the State Department. And I worked with a lot of Democratic aligned organizations. I was on a 501c4 that was for all extent and purposes a Democratic operation. The hate and discontent I've received from those people as if I'm some kind of traitor. That somehow the votes are, we've got this, let me just first say, because I don't think I finished my point before. Generally, these people who make these arguments are the ones that have healthcare, right? They're the ones who don't have family or friends who are experiencing a 20-25% raise in their rent. They're not the victims of these financialization policies of the last 50 years. And they're maintaining status quo. And what I especially see in terms of this argument coming from people in DC is a fear of being left out, a fear of not getting invited to the Christmas party. right? Because that's a very real fear. I mean, it keeps people. I mean, there's all kind of
FOMO. The Democratic Party is running on FOMO fumes.
Yeah, I think so. In a sense of that, like, in a sense of these people who are part of the party. But this attitude that you're going to split the vote. We went out there. We talked to tens of thousands of people. I mean, probably at least 50,000 people in the course of our petitioning. We rarely ever came across that sentiment. That's a sentiment that really is confined to Washington, D.C., to Twitter, to MSNBC, to Fox, among normal people, which, again, remember that recent polls are showing that almost 2/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. This idea of somehow splitting the vote between the Democrats and, it's not an issue for them because, one, they know it's not real, but it's also not affecting their lives. But this idea of running as a Democrat, I've been there. I've worked with them. I mean, people are interested, contact me. I'll send you a link to a YouTube show I did where I went through and I spoke about all the various Democratic leaders I have met with, Jack Reed, Ike Skelton, Adam Smith, Nancy Pelosi, who clearly, during the wars, knew the wars were wrong, knew they were unwinnable, knew they were immoral, but went along with them because it was the best thing to do for politics. I mean, over and over and over again. I met with Jack Reed one time, and Reed and his people tell us, yeah, we know there's a discrepancy. This is just one example. I can give you like 12 others like this. But Reed, who at that point was either he was either the number one or number two on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He says to me, I know that there's a discrepancy between what the generals are saying about Afghanistan and what's really happening there. But we don't feel like it's our place to get in the middle of that. This is coming from the Senate, you're right, the Senate Armed Services Committee, either chair or ranking member or whatever. And that attitude is this cowardice, right? This need to go along to get along, for lack of a better term. That's what motivates these people. And when you've seen it and you've experienced it, how can you take part in it? And I think also, too, basically, very simply, if you believe the two-party system is the root of our issue, money and politics, but also this two-party system, why contribute to it then? Why continue to go along with it? Why continue to enable it? Why not try and build something that will break that and allow for greater democracy, and then by extension, relief for our folks, that our neighbors, our family, our friends who are suffering?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you tell me, actually, Matthew, a little bit more about what you did here when you went door to door and spoke to people? Because we're seeing these polls, right? We're seeing Joe Biden with a historically low approval rating. We see his approval rating with people under 30 at under 30%. What is it that 64% of Democrats would prefer a candidate other than Joe Biden be running on the Democratic Party line in 2024? Right. And you see these numbers for conservative candidates among groups that were perceived to be disproportionately Democratic in nature, where something like, nearly half, I think there's only a 3-point difference when you look at Latino breakdown between whether they prefer to vote for a DeSantis or a Trump versus a Joe Biden. So when you look at all of that, it's obvious that there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the Democratic Party. Oh, I forgot the one where it's 1 million voters who are registered Democrats have now flipped and become registered Republicans. So how is this manifesting itself anecdotally when you're talking to people at the doors?
People see there's no difference between the two. They both understand that both have been in power and their lives have been worsening. It goes back to the Carlin quip. It's a big club and you ain't in it. And people understand it. And so when we were out there, again, talking to tens of thousands of people, that's the sentiment we met, and we had all these personal stories. So we really pushed the end the war on drugs issue. That really resonated with people, not just legalize marijuana, but end the war on drugs. This oppressive, racist policy of the last 5 decades that have ruined millions and millions of families and communities across the country, right? And the responses we got to that was overwhelming. I mean, and not because people want to go and get high in a park, but because they've had people in their lives who have been brutalized by the war on drugs. Look, I'm a combat veteran, so it's not, a lot of guys overdose. I can count 6 I've known who've died from overdose, right? So when I tell you this stuff is real, this is what I'm talking about. And, when you're out there talking to people, and these are the stories you hear about, that their children, their spouse, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, their father, their mother, whoever it was are no longer with us because we have a policy in this country where we criminalize substance abuse and addiction rather than take it on as a public health matter. And that's a bipartisan policy. You know, I mean, people recognize that. They see that type of complicity. And they don't have time for this MSNBC, Fox News punditry where, you know, it becomes the lesser of two evils is something that they have disavowed. So we met with a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. And this is something that scares the Democratic Party and should scare the Republican Party as well for something different. And even in the most, I guess maybe the simplest way for me to say this is even in the most partisan places that we did our petitioning at. So the last 2 weeks of our petitioning matched up with the 2 weeks of the early primary voting here in North Carolina. So we were at the polling places. And voters who literally 3 or 4 minutes before had just filled out a Democrat or Republican Party primary ballot would meet us in the parking lot and would sign our petition to reckon. I mean, so we were talking to partisan voters who were saying, I would talk to folks who'd be like, look, I'm a conservative, you're a socialist. No way I'm voting for you, but you need to be on the ballot. And we need other people on the ballot. This idea that people understand and see that the whole thing is corrupt, that the whole thing is just one operation, again, to squeeze money to the top. People understand that and they recognize the need for something different. And the thing for us to do is to show them how it's possible, right? To show them that this is possible. Think big, create big. I'm reluctant to use words because of the climate we're in right now, like tear it down, burn it down, you know, like that kind of stuff. But, you know, I mean, but that's the sentiment that's out there. There's a lot of anger because people are suffering.
Well, Dr. Stein, let me come back to you then, because I think people want to think big. And if anything, the resistance that I think a lot of leftists have to perhaps throwing their hat in or the lot in with the Green Party is this perception that the Green Party hasn't done enough or has tried very hard and failed to accomplish what something like the Libertarian Party has accomplished with respect to ballot access and a certain level of quote unquote seriousness is the perception. I think a lot of folks are looking around and saying, okay, I would love to support a party that had an opportunity to genuinely challenge the Democratic Party. But as I'm looking around at midterms, as I look at what a potential 2024 primary is going to look like, it seems unlikely that a serious challenge to Biden or a serious challenge to the Democratic Party apparatus is going to come through the Green Party. And people might be saying, oh, well, what about Andrew Yang? What about MPP? I don't know. What about libertarians? Whatever. I mean, what do you say to that? What is the Green Party doing? And are there opportunities that are emerging for the party to gain more traction because of this widespread frustration that people are experiencing with the Democratic Party post-Roe?
Great. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really important subject. And I think one thing that's going to help overall is just engaging this conversation, because so many, even in the progressive left, have been too intimidated by this climate of political repression and retribution to even have this conversation. And I think it's a really important conversation that will begin to generate, solutions and hopeful developments in and of itself. But one thing that's really important to put out there, I think, in light of this conversation that I hope is beginning, is to understand that like the Greens are the only survivors. We actually are. It's like compared to what? We're not strong, but compared to what? Compared to every other non-corporate political party, we're the strong man, totally, simply for having survived. The usual rule is that any national party, like say the Citizens Party, for example, or the Socialists, or any party that attains national stature, which is not a corporate party and doesn't have deep pockets like the Libertarians do. So they're in a different category. If you go Libertarian, you're going to be hamstrung by the corporate money, which will, have real limits on what you can do and where you can go. So that money's not going to be there for the progressive agenda. If you look at parties that are truly progressive and that are people powered, as a rule, they get wiped out every 10 years or so. That's about their lifespan. Socialists lasted longer, but they've been definitely, swept under the bus, really. And there's a concerted attack that begins to take place. And part of it's the demonizing of the Red Scares or the left scares or the ballot access laws that changed in order to shut down the voices of progressive politics in the electoral arena. I mean, as money has concentrated, the rules of the game have become very challenging. But the price that we pay for that as a society is that we are really looking at really extinction, extinction not just of all the creatures out there, but extinction of human society as well, whether from climate or economic implosion or whatever. But, there are 1,000 reasons right now why we are on a absolutely deadly trajectory that needs to be changed right away. So it's worth putting the time and energy into adapting to our new situation. And I want to point to what's recently happened in Latin America in particular, but also in Europe, where the left is really galloping forward after having been really beaten back for decades by neoliberalism. And by U.S. intervention and militarism and all that, there are just really dramatic reversals taking place right now, which are very hopeful and which we should be taking inspiration from. So, for example, just even consider Chile or Colombia, which have recently had really shocking peaceful revolutions. But those revolutions at the ballot box were also generated by people in the streets and very strong social movements. So both have to go together. And it really takes a lot of, I think, thought planning and coalition building, which we've only begun to do. In California, the Greens recently ran in the primary with the Peace and Freedom Party for a whole slate of statewide offices. And they basically doubled their results for the two of them and found a really wonderful reception and have a lot to build on. And I think this is exactly what we need to be doing right now as progressives. We had something before the Sanders campaign got going in 2016, which totally took the wind out of the sails. It was called Left Elect, and it was an effort for the small parties of the left, the non-corporate parties, to begin exploring collaborations, Socialist Alternative, Peace and Freedom, the ISO, and a variety of others. We all got together and we were starting to explore collaborations. We actually worked together a lot in the streets on the climate movement. And on the global climate convergence and a lot of big actions that took place around that. But the electoral movement really got cut off at the knees because, boom, all of a sudden Bernie was running. So everybody wanted to be a part of Bernie's run. And then the same thing happened in 2020. But I think people have gotten really tired of that and they see exactly where it goes.
Are you worried about that? As there's all this speculation about 2024 and who could be a left challenger. I mean, are you at a point where you would almost be frustrated by or disappointed by or antagonistic to a challenge from a left candidate on the Democratic Party line, like from a let's say a hypothetical Nina Turner presidential candidacy or Marianne Williamson presidential candidacy? Are you at a point where you would say it's just a distraction, they're never going to let it happen, and that all that energy would be better put toward either a third-party candidate or these other more local efforts?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you didn't know that for the first Sanders campaign, you certainly learned that after the second Sanders campaign, because what could have gone more right? What was not done right? I mean, small things around the margins, but the public
according to Twitter, hiring me and David Sirota, that's really where Bernie went.
Well, there you go. And any progressive candidate is going to do the same. So, Nina, unfortunately, is a complete non-starter. There's no way the Democrats would ever support her. Someone who could sort of do double talk and mealy mouth stuff, that's they could do that. They could very well do a mealy mouth thing, but I doubt that they would do that either. It's no wonder that the Democratic field is so totally shallow, like lackluster. It's just like there's nothing inspired. It's completely insipid and, puts you to sleep to even look at it. Like it's
even Mayor Pete Dr. Stein, because my theory is that the reason that we're getting all of these articles about how Biden might not run from these establishment sources, that the lid seems to be off the pot, and it's a free for all with respect to speculation about Biden and his mental capacity and all of this. Now, I think it's because everybody is geared up, or some portion of the Democratic Party is gearing up behind Mayor Pete.
I think that's probably true. I think Mayor Pete is kind of all they have, but there's nothing about Mayor Pete that's going to catch fire or that's going to succeed or that's going to solve the crises that are barreling down on us, whether it's, healthcare or the climate or war. Mayor Pete is about as blank a slate and as empty a head and heart, I would say, as one can. I mean, he's a human being, of course, but as a political entity, there's no there. And that's what the Democrats require, because they're constantly playing, they're trying to be a populist party funded by Wall Street and the usual suspects, and it can't be done. So our politics of necessity has come to an absolute dead end. And the question is whether we're going to die with it, and I think there are enough people who just see the writing on the wall. They're not going to stand for it. And I think we have to take our lesson from really popular uprisings that are going on now around the world. The U.S. empire is over. It's over. It hasn't entirely caught up to us, but it is more and more. And, we're driving Russia and China together and much of the third world behind them. So, the doors are just closing all over the place as really defined by U.S. policy dictated by the parties of war and Wall Street. So I think anybody with half a brain right now is waking up, if they're not already awake, and they have to hear the music, and the music is not with the Democratic Party, and our future, our lives, our survival is not there. And this is being writ large in a huge way every day, from the drought in California to the breakup of these glaciers. I don't know if you're seeing this staggering footage. And those glaciers, they're not mentioning this, they're not connecting the dots, but there are those glaciers, which are way bigger, that are tumbling into the ocean. They're not going to just tumble down some mountain range onto dry land. They're tumbling into the ocean. And we are verging on truly catastrophic consequences if we don't do something really fast. We need a World War II scale emergency Green New Deal, to even survive. So there's action that we really need. And most people are feeling this in one way or the other, whether it's the heat waves and the heat stroke that's setting in all over the place, or the water that they don't have.
With respect to the action, though, I mean, people want to, I think, be supportive of the Green Party. And you mentioned earlier that the Libertarian Party was corporate backed and has that resource. Is part of the problem, is part of the demand, the Green Party needs more money. Is this a moment where the Green Party, is or should be saying to disgruntled Democratic voters, hey, I know that you need another landing pad. We want to be here to receive you, instead of donating to Act Blue so they can go and use your contact information to undermine Matthew Hoh's campaign, donate to the Green Party and actually have your interests further. Is that the kind of call that is being done, or that should be done by the Green Party?
It badly needs to be done. I mean, there's all kinds of things. There's a lot of strategy that needs to happen, in the Green Party. I'm especially frustrated because for 3 years, I was fighting off the Senate Intelligence Committee, being formally investigated and constantly smeared as a so-called Russian asset, which finally they completely exonerated me from and thanked me for my cooperation and said it was basically a pile of nothing. Now I'm dealing with the Federal Election Commission, which is trying to get me to pay back much of the matching funds, which they say, which were used to get on the ballot, but they say, oh no, you can't use that after the Democrats hold their convention. Well, what does the Democratic convention have to do with the third party burden for getting on the ballot? Nothing. So we're now challenging this very unconstitutional statute that governs public funding in court. So I'm very tied up with that case right now. I hope to have this monkey off my back very soon. And, as a former presidential candidate, you have a responsibility to help the party move forward. And I feel like my hands have been tied now for 4 years, maybe by accident, maybe by design, who knows? But my hands have been fairly tied, and there's so much that needs to be done. So I really welcome anyone who would like to contribute to that effort. And I would really love to have a conversation among, people-powered political entities right now to start putting our heads together to think about what are the things that we need to do to really begin moving people's politics forward at this time of utter necessity and unprecedented opportunity.
Yeah, Matthew, I want to come back to you, and I know that we are about an hour in, so I don't want to keep you too long, but I'm curious about the state and the race, and about the intensity of the Democratic Party's involvement here, and wondering how much of it is about this political moment we're in, where there's obviously a lot of fear among Democrats that people are defecting left, right, and center, but also, whether, what the Senate race looks like, if it is going to be close, and whether this is about the Democratic Party's generalized fear about losing the Senate, damning the end of Joe Biden's first term, and potentially losing Congress and the White House and the Supreme Court, and losing all control for perhaps a generation. I mean, what is it looking like in North Carolina? What are the Senate races looking like?
Yeah, let me just comment. Their attitude, the Democrats, seem to be that there's going to be a Deus Ex Machina, right? That's going to. A couple of weeks ago, it was Matthew McConaughey, right, is going to become the presidential nominee. And then this last week, it was Jon Stewart, that somehow someone is going to descend and save them without them having to address the needs of people. We have more than half of our school kids in North Carolina, 52%, qualify for free school lunches. Matthew McConaughey is not going to, whether he's dressed up as an astronaut or whatever, is not going to do anything to rectify that, right? What rectifies that is a living wage, is people paid for their fair labor in accordance with what their costs are to live as a family. I mean, so for us, for me and my campaign, our thing is an annualized living wage tied to localized housing costs, right? Also serves as a form of rent control. You're never going to hear anything from the Democrats on that. So the idea that somehow that they're going to do things to ameliorate or help or assist people, they're looking for cheap, easy answers, which they're not going to get. They're not going to get. And in a state here, it's interesting because this time last year, there were 4 candidates for the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate that were considered top tier candidates. By November, 3 of them had dropped out. And my understanding is Governor Cooper and Chuck Schumer called them and cleared them, got them to drop out in order to clear the primary for Sherry Beasley. I have different thoughts on this. One, Beasley, who is the nominee, is the most centrist. She is a Joe Biden style Democrat. She's got there's all kinds of aspects to this. But let me just say this: her television ad so far has been her running supposedly as an outsider. She'll say things like neither the Democrats or the Republicans, as if she's not. Hasn't already run in partisan races before. But then too, she talks about trafficking. And certainly, look, the 53 people killed in that trailer a week or so ago as a result of our bipartisan border policy is something we should be outraged about and talk about. That's not what she's talking about, though. And she's talking about being tough on crime. So she's not even running on anything that you could consider left. Right. And so where she's at in the polls is right now about down 3 or 4 from the Republican Ted Budd, who is a Donald Trump supported Republican. He handedly beat the other Republicans in the race. He is a gun store owner. And honest to God, the first television ad he put out was simply guns and monster trucks, and people could go on YouTube and look it up. You're right. I mean, like that's cool. what they're running on here. Exactly. So that's the state of the race. Beasley was down 8 or 9. That's what the polls have shown consistently. Generic Republican, generic Democrat, about a -8 for the Democrats. And so Beasley's gotten a bump primarily because of, I think, abortion and the gun issue, which unfortunately has been so clearly shown to us these last several weeks. But, you know, her candidacy is uninspiring. She's not running on any issues that are going to help working families. You know, the race itself is going to be one about money. Beasley just announced she raised $7.5 million in the second quarter, which sets a record for North Carolina. Which, if you understand North Carolina, you know that in 2020, the U.S. Senate race in North Carolina was $300 million. Tom Tillis, the Republican who won, spent $25 million. Cal Cunningham, who lost $50 million. And then there was $225 million of dark money. Wow. Right. That's super PAC money, you know, and anybody, if you don't understand that money buys what it's meant to buy, I don't know what to tell you, you know, I mean, so that's kind of the state of it in the sense of that there are no real issues being spoken about. Certainly not something like, what do we do about half our kids who are living in poverty and qualify for free school lunch? There's not that conversation. It's a race for Beasley to try and win these supposed Republicans who are going to flip over to her because she's tough on crime. And Jesus. Yeah, Bud to basically win because he's Trump's guy. And we do have a libertarian here, Shannon Bray, who is a great guy. You know, I disagree with him on a lot of things, but, you know, at least you have some voice in the race that is going to be arguing for ending the war on drugs like the libertarians do, trans rights, marriage equality, those types of issues, besides like a Green candidate. So there is a potential if we can get into when we're in the race officially, and if we're allowed in the ballot on the debates, and we are able to get into the media, that we can raise these issues and speak to the issues that are affecting people. Because
so there's still a chance for you.
Oh, absolutely a chance. No, we're not. I mean, if they
what's happening with you? Like what needs to happen for you to actually make that an actuality?
You know, well, I mean, you're an attorney, so you understand I can't really talk to specifics, and I wish I could. And we're moving on things, and I wish I was able to talk more about it right now because we are moving on things. But we're pursuing all our options, legal, administrative, political, in order to get our spot on the ballot that we earned. You know, I'm not going to let people down. I'm not going to let down the hundreds of people who did this work for us, the tens of thousands who signed that petition. I'm not going to let them down, you know, as well as the need of the people I love. What am I supposed to, people who I love who can't go to a dentist because they can't afford it. You know, and they're suffering, let alone all that. That's just one or two examples, all the other ones. I'm supposed to then say, you know, it's too hard. I got scared by this Elias law firm. We're going to give up. I don't know if I can raise the money. We'll try again next year. No, come on. If they thought that was the person I am, or any of the people on my campaign are, or any of the people in the North Carolina Green Party are, they got that completely wrong. You know, like, look, I hate them. They can hate me. I don't care. You know, they're probably going to come after me like they came after Jill. And I'm aware of that. I'm fine with that. You know, I guarantee that my FEC and IRS records will be, you know, gone through with the proverbial fine-tooth comb. Because that's another aspect, right? There's all this intimidation and oppression and suppression during the campaign. But afterwards, what they seek to do is to punish, right? To make an example of you. And that's what they're dealing with Jill right now, making an example of her. You want to run for president? You want to try and run a campaign where you're talking about healthcare and ending the wars and climate and maybe allowing people to earn a wage where they're not, you know, so they don't end up in debt? Oh, well, then we're going to punish you, you know, and that's exactly what's happening to Jill right now. And if that happens to me, so be it. I live a pretty simple life. I'm here with my dogs. I'm a disabled veteran. I don't do much. I mean, it's not going to really matter to me, you know, I mean, but in the sense of this is what we're up against, this Leviathan, right? That, again, against the state and against both the Democratic Party and the Elias law firm. And it's the fight that we want because it's a good fight. It's a just fight and it's a worthy fight.
Matthew Hoh says, I welcome their hatred. I will keep an eye on this.
FDR said that originally.
I mean, of course. Of course, we will be keeping an eye on this. Look, Matthew, I hope that you might accept an invitation to come and talk about this on the Hill as well. We'll get you a nice little headline going, like Democratic Party, RIGS, North Carolina Senate. Get some good clicks and eyeballs on it, because that's the game.
It writes itself. It writes itself. I mean, no, happy to, please. And people who are listening, if they can support us, we are in a David versus Goliath fight here. I need your help. We are up against the state of North Carolina and the Democratic Party, not the North Carolina Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party. We were up against the Leviathan. I can't stress that enough. And we need people's help. So MatthewHoh4Senate.org. And please donate and get others to donate, please.
Thank you, Matthew. And thank you, Dr. Stein, for joining the show again. Let people know where they can find you on the interwebs.
Let's see. You can find me at my Twitter at Dr. Jill Stein, Dr. No period, Jill Stein, or at jillstein.net, where my ongoing struggle for the rights of independent parties and alternative parties to have a voice in our political system. That struggle, which is currently in court, is on that site as well, jillstein.net. And I'll just say, the Democratic Party doesn't know what they're taking on in going after Matthew Hoh, because you don't go into combat 3 times and then have the courage to quit, to walk away and become a leading anti-war advocate. This is not a quitter. This is not someone who takes his role lightly. So I'd say, look out, Democratic Party. You may have bitten off more than you can chew.
Well, I really do appreciate both of you speaking with me today. I feel weirdly inspired and galvanized by this conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing both of you win both of your legal entanglements right now. As a reminder, I know how it is. I mean, this is part of the irony of all of the Supreme Court stuff, is that for so many people, it's the wake up call that the courts are not the leveling playing field, the Uno reverse card that the left has so long thought it could be, and protecting us in this last bastion of hope, and more often is used against us in these ways. But please do check out those links and support both of these causes to the extent that you are able and are interested in doing so. Thank you for listening. And to our audience, as a reminder, this is a podcast that comes out twice a week. This is our free Thursday episode. If you want an additional episode, you can go to patreon.com/badfaithpodcast and subscribe to get an additional episode every Monday. You heard Dr. Stein make reference to the peaceful revolution, electoral, at the ballot box in Colombia. We had a recent episode with her 2016 running mate, Ajamu Baraka, as well as Benjamin Norton, about what has recently happened in Colombia. It was a terrific episode. And a reminder, you can find clips of all of the premium episodes, because we make as much public as possible at Bad Faith YouTube. Do go there, like, subscribe, and check in periodically, because the algorithm is not our friend here on the left. You know that to be true. Thanks, as always, for listening, and do keep the faith. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.